Welcome to Medyascope. COVID-19 continues to be the primary global problem, and today we are going to take a look at Italy. Italy has been the epicenter of the pandemic for a long time and suffered not only with a high death toll, but also economically and socially. Today we are going to talk about the new and post-pandemic Italy with photojournalist Piero Castellano. Okay, Piero, you are another stranger. You are another yabancı for us. You've been in Turkey for a long time, especially in Ankara. And so you like Ankara, like me. And just tell us, who are you and what did you do in Turkey?
I lived in Ankara for 6 or 7 years. I was working as a photojournalist there and cooperating with some Italian and international media. Then I got back to Italy and I settled down in Genoa for like 2 years. And I often come back to Turkey as a tourist to visit my friends, to see my favorite places, to taste my favorite Turkish food. And then I got stuck in Italy because of a pandemic. And of course, Italy was the most affected place in the world.
That's why you are here. We are not going to talk about Ankara and Turkish chai.
Sadly.
First of all, I want to talk about the current situation and normalization process in Italy. When have you observed the peak and plateau, and has the climate of fear diminished?
Well, I have to say that the climate of fear was very, very strong at the peak of the outbreak. And now, and I will say, unfortunately, now it's almost gone, in the sense that people really are longing for normality. And now, as soon as they were allowed to go out, they just flocked outside in parks. Of course, most people are observing precautions. They're wearing masks. They are keeping social distance. But many others just can't, especially kids. And this is kind of worrying. Starting from Monday, most business will reopen. Basically, the strictest limitations of the lockdown will be over. And there is a lot of uncertainty and nervousness about it, because many people feel that this is just going to happen out of tiredness, not because there is scientific evidence that the worst is over. So we don't really know. On one side, everybody is happy because finally we can get to some semblance of normality. On the other side, we fear, many people fear, that the second wave and crucially a second lockdown will be even more devastating than the first one.
Mm-hmm. From a scale of 1 to 5, how normal would you say you are today? Also, what is
1? But to me, 1, because I'm not going out, of course. But no, outside, I would say so far it's like 2 out of 5. And probably on Monday we will see 3 or even 4. Of course, there is no chance to go back to normality as long as masks and gloves should be worn, as long as the social distance will happen, and there will be plexiglass screens in markets and so on. But of course, it will be very important to open business. Obviously, it's really hard to observe such subtle precautions. Social distance is kind of easy on a line, for example. Just keep like 1 meter, 2 meters from the person in front of you. On public transportation is a little bit harder, and then it becomes really hard in social events. People just forget they are social animals within to socialize. It's kind of simple, not easy, but simple to remember not to shake hands or not to hug friends when we meet them. And we are Italians, so we also kiss each other on cheeks when we meet. But it's really hard then to remember that we shouldn't be too close, that shouldn't sit side by side, and so on. So it's going to be weird for sure.
Of course, for Italians, it's going to be weird, especially for Mediterranean countries. And Italy is very much at peace with its history and culture. You have always had big and lively family dinners, gatherings, for instance, like you said, kissing, hugging, touching. How would you imagine a family, for instance, from Lombardia? talking about coronavirus days, about these days after 10, 20 years in a family dinner, what's going to be happened? How will the culture will be shaped again?
Well, we as humans, everybody tends to remember only the good parts. We always forget the worst. And that makes legends that the hardest times were the best times, that we were so good at the time, and so on. So if I have to imagine something like this, everybody will see it in a heroic way, with some words about some respect about the losses, all the dear ones, the beloved ones who died. But then I am afraid that we will learn very few lessons from that. We will argue with each other about which government or which political party was better or worse, mostly worse, because our national sport, like Turks, is to argue with each other. And then I don't know, it's really hard to imagine a social gathering right now. Some things can very possibly be changed forever, or maybe when maybe a cure or a vaccine will come, we will just forget about it, like we did with the Spanish flu. 100 years later, we have no recollection whatsoever of it.
And you are not positive and not full of hope about the, all this managing process and outcomes of this crisis, because many people say, we have so much to learn, it's gonna be different, all the respect to the nature and everything's going to be different. We have outcomes, we have results from this crisis, from this chaos, but you look so negative and pessimistic, right?
Well, thank you but I wouldn't use the word like positive right now when there is so much testing going around. So I'm very happy to be negative in that sense right now. But yeah, actually, no, I don't feel like being pessimistic at all. Unlike most people, actually, one of the most startling realization for me in the beginning of this was the sense of disbelief that most people showed. Like they could never really conceive that their daily life could be completely disrupted by something so sudden and unpredicted, like a pandemic.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's not my experience. I've been traveling a lot. I've been through a lot of natural disasters. My years in Turkey were quite interesting on that. I witnessed, unfortunately, a lot of the time of the worst bombings in Turkish history. I was in Ankara and the Darbe, of course. So it was normal to me to understand that something can happen and then you maybe better don't go out or just be careful. And so I realized that for most people, especially in the West, in Western Europe, this is absolutely strange. I happened to talk with a Ukrainian friend, an ethnic Russian but Ukrainian national, and he told me that he couldn't understand this either because his life changed so completely, so many times. He's from Eastern Ukraine. And I felt the same. People really found it hard to realize that. And I know that in any stressful event that can be like just a bad experience or a natural disaster or a war or whatever, people behave like they always do. Good people behave better. Bad people or people with bad instincts just give their worst. So everybody gives what they have to do. This is like a big magnifier. Everything is magnified, both as perception and in reality. And so I don't think people will become better, and I don't think people will become worse. But there is and there will be a lot of stress, a lot of changes. Every change is an opportunity. So of course there will come a lot of good things out of this. A lot of people will understand more, they will think a lot about their lives, they will read more, they will use their life for the better. Many people will have lost their beloved ones, or they realize that they can lose the beloved ones for no apparent reason suddenly. So there are going to be changes in our collective personality. But at the same time, I think a lot of people will just exploit the situation. There will be, like in any crisis, a lot of profiteering, a lot of political exploitation, a lot of ignorance. And we are seeing right now all these conspiracy theories that get stronger and stronger by the day. The more the people are unused to this loss of normality, loss of security, and the more they seek solace, they seek explanations in the most absurd theories that suddenly seem like credible. So I don't feel I'm especially pessimistic, but I think we live in interesting times and we shouldn't expect too much from ourselves.
Yes, it seems like there is still time, we will think about that. We will talk about this.
Sadly.
Sadly. And there's a point I wonder. The whole world was mesmerized by homemade footages from Italy, showing people singing and dancing on their balconies. As an Italian, were you able to experience these romantic interactions? Did these videos show the real and complete Italy, or just a tiny minority on Twitter, for instance?
Well, this is a very complicated question. I am from southern Italy, but I live in Genoa, in a quite of a very posh neighborhood. So here it was unthinkable that something like this happened. I cannot even imagine my neighbors going outside to sing or to dance or to chat with, or even to chat with each other. But
Why
on the
not?
same, because they are famously introverts, or they are kind of like to show that they are. They're not very social, or this is the way they like to appear. But at the same time, it's true that in most of Italy, even in the north, in the so-called cold north, it happened a lot, especially in the beginning, when people found so strange, as I said, so unexpected, so unusual, so unprecedented to be locked inside without any social interaction. And so they start interacting the way they knew. There were choirs, there were collective dances, there were Pilates lessons from one balcony to the other. It's an interesting question also because it was, and in a way, it was widespread indeed and totally spontaneous. There was no call for it or something. But it's also true that it was very much criticized, especially in the areas hit the hardest by the outbreak, when thousands of people were dying. People thought it was inappropriate. There were critics even on social media. There were actually arguments that you are celebrating while we are dying here. We are mourning for our dead, and there is nothing to celebrate, and so on. I don't think it was a celebration. Mostly it was an act of collective, how can I say, just to be together, to exercise the fear, because there was a lot of fear at the time. So I think critics were understandable, but kind of hardly appropriate. At the same time, sorry?
It's a dilemma, right? You have to see the two sides of the story.
Of course, like everywhere. There is a saying in southern Italy, and we say there is no wedding without tears, and there is no funeral without laughter.
Oh,
it's very true, I think. There is always this kind of reaction. And not coincidentally, the first and the most widespread choirs and singing and dancing were in the south, that at the time was virtually untouched by the outbreak. So they didn't see actually a point in just out of precaution, and just to encourage themselves. They were just trying to be social anyway, in a very theatrical way. Southern Italy is Magna Grecia, and of course they are Greek. They love theater, and very dramatic, very spectacular, everything they do. So it was actually widespread. But I'd like to say that here, well, normally like someone singing on the balcony will promptly, somebody will probably call the police for that. Here on some night, there were some street musicians who stopped every few blocks and played very loud music, like Nessun Dorma by Pavarotti, or the national anthem. We Italians have so much great music and such a bad national anthem, so it was kind of creepy, but it was a very touching moment, and people really enjoyed it. They will never sing on the balconies, but they went out and they applaud this street musician. It was a very touching moment indeed.
Nice. It's a nice story. Let's talk about you. You are a journalist and you work on street photography. And probably you are thinking COVID-19 has also become a topic where the media has been tested. For instance, in Turkey, press is separated into two. We have been able to observe the polarization between partisan government-sided media and the others. How was this issue observed in Italy? Was this, like a polarization or separation into groups? How was it in Italy during pandemic?
Well, even in normal times, press in Italy is extremely polarized. Not in a very serious way as in Turkey, but they always feud with each other. They have most of newspaper, most of media are strictly aligned with some political side, not necessarily a party. So of course they gave the worst of themselves. But I can say it was interesting to see that local media, like in city or region areas, they gave the best of themselves. As always, people turn to their local web paper, local magazines, local websites, and so to get news, to get immediate news, to understand what regions were doing, because there were very big difference between different regions. And so it was interesting from this side too. Of course, as a street photographer and the freelancers, I've been virtually unemployed. I have some colleagues, some young colleagues, and very excited ones that they went out. They went in Milan. Some of them even managed to enter hospitals. They got great shots, but I will rather question the ethics of this. I support them. Of course, they had to eat. They have to work, and they did a precious work. But I really didn't feel like doing this, not out of personal danger, just because I didn't feel like it was like interesting. It was not newsworthy. Of course, I will die to get some photos of Piazza Duomo in Milan or Piazza San Marco in Venice, completely void, completely empty, with no tourists and anything. But I understand that this is not time for this. So from my personal point of view, it was very strange. On the other side, I very often turn to foreign media in Italy for information. Mm-hmm. It was a very strange experience, kind of reversing what I experienced in Turkey, because there was excellent coverage from BBC, from the foreign correspondent, or BBC correspondent in Rome, and there was a lot of good press catching some points that were completely neglected by Italian press. Even the first news of the complete lockdown, that until that point was limited to Lombardy, was given by CNN on the evening of 9th March. So I learned that I had to stay at home the evening of 9th March from CNN. And it was kind of weird, very strange. It was a Turkish experience in a sense. But I can say that my trust in traditional Italian media has decreased a lot during these times. But selectively, I found some young newspapers, young media, which are very, very interesting, very well done, and worth to be followed, indeed. So it's an interesting time. It's a big crisis for information too, for information and for media outlets, of course. But as any crisis, it's also an opportunity. We'll see what will come out of it. It's up to us.
Yeah, of course, that was a risk for photographers, like you said. It could be a crisis, it could be a chance for some. Depends on. Let's continue to talk about the press. I want to talk about this freedom of speech, especially because COVID-19, coronavirus, has become a strong topic in terms of freedom of press in a way that we have not experienced before. We were used to talking about human rights, women's rights, freedom of speech, and more all the time. But pandemic has become a milestone for talking about freedom of press. What do you say about the examination of Italy and the world about it?
Yeah, well, it's a developing situation, I would say. We don't really know. We are seeing what's going on in Hungary, for example. Critics say that Hungary is a full dictatorship now in the heart of Europe, in the heart of European Union. while others say, no, you're just prejudiced against Orban. These are just normal, acceptable measures during this time. In Italy, one of the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest failure of the government during this more than 2 months long lockdown has been not to being able to implement a viable, a credible mass testing and tracing. And one of the reasons it's because a lot of people refuse to be tracked, refuse to be tracked via smartphone or anything. And that's because of privacy concerns, of course. That's totally understandable. But in my opinion, this is an extraordinary situation, and maybe one of the few situations when extraordinary measures should be acceptable. The fact that most of us don't find them acceptable is probably a measure of the loss of trust, the mistrust we have in our own governments. That's a very serious alarm bell ringing here. I found myself like eager to see the police disperse crowds because it was dangerous, and this is really strange for me. I usually I would regret, I would despise such an intervention normally. And about the press, well, there is big responsibility. When I said that the news of the lockdown was given by CNN in Italy, it came out that it was leaked. The day after, the morning after, the government would enforce a decree forcing people to stay at home. But the decree was leaked to CNN by someone. Then came out it was the Lombardy regional government. And that very night, that evening, just 12 hours before the lockdown was enforced, up to 20,000 people escaped from quarantine Lombardy to the south. And unfortunately, hundreds, possibly thousands, brought the virus with them. Yeah. So this brings a lot of ethical problems. Was it right to give the news of this leaked information? Probably it was, but the consequences were really serious. I don't blame the journalists, of course, I blame the ones leaking it. But as you see, there are a lot of dilemmas we are not used to. Something that maybe in times of war could be acceptable, but we were not ready, and this is not a war. So it's really a very difficult time.
Piero Castellano, it's always good to see you, and hope to see you. We can see
hope to see you. Hope to have a meet in Similar Park next time.
Yeah, not in Istanbul, in Ankara. I will see you.
Of course, they don't have CMIT in Istanbul. Come on.
Okay, it's so good. Your opinions are precious. Thank you so much.